One of the first questions I get asked every single time a client finds out that mold is one of their root causes to their health problems is, what can I do immediately right now about my mold exposure? Right after this question, they also ask, is there an air filter you recommend? For a long time, my answer was no. The main issue with most air filters you get is that if you put it into a moldy environment, that air filter itself becomes mold sick. This is because air filters, by definition, capture particulates that go across their filter. That's their role, is to reduce particulates in the air. This is fine and good if you're dealing with particulates like fur, dander, and basic dust. But if you're picking up things like mold spores and mycotoxins, you now have a machine that is basically infested with the seeds that will start a new mold colony inside it, and that machine becomes compromised. It now can be a mold spreader. In the last few months, however, I have researched and personally tested a new air filter that only cannot get sick from mold. It also does something very different than air filters. Instead of capturing particulates and simply storing it, it actually does something to break down mold spores and mycotoxins so they can no longer harm you. In today's episode, I'll be introducing you to the Hi-Tech Air Reactor and sharing the best and worst on this new air filter solution. I'll also be talking about traditional HEPA air filters, if or when they are useful, and when and how air filters like AirDoctor and Molecule are helpful and warranted on your healing journey from mold. It's time to take control of your indoor air quality and heal from mold. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly Podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormone, skin, sleep, and brain concerns. Literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. Okay, guys, so this episode, I am going to just state off right from the beginning a disclaimer that I'm not aiming to make this episode like a research document. I am not a researcher. And I don't mean that in the terms of you don't need a license or something to make you a researcher, but I am not gifted with the skills or passion or desire to be as detailed as what a researcher would be, say, by collecting documents and giving proof. So this episode is just to simply introduce you to some concepts, share with you my personal journey on finding air filters that actually work both for my family and for my clients. And then after this week's episode, in the next 2 weeks, I actually am going to be having 2 different people on to the podcast who are researchers in nature and who can give you their personal mold story, how they went from fairly healthy to completely destroyed from mold, and then how they discovered this technology. One of them who's coming on, who's going to be on in 2 weeks, Edward, he is an engineer. He's studied physics and chemistry, and he's going to literally describe all the scientific nuances to how this technology works that I'm introducing to you today. So if you are a researcher in nature or you want those hard facts, definitely hang out and come back in 2 weeks and listen to Edward's episode on the science behind this high-tech air reactor. But in the meantime, this is just a little intro to help sink you into what this air filter is, how I learned about it, what my reservations were, and what I did to try and, as a non-researcher, make sure I wasn't buying something that was going to not work, right? Every time you've been on the healing journey for a long time, one of the biggest issues is that people feel is having spent money on things that didn't work, and we're sick of it. So we're going to be doing this and tackling this over the next 3 weeks. But so if the research is all you, hang out. If all you want to know is my thoughts and feelings and how I got to this and how I've seen my own health and my family's health improve, then this episode is going to answer all those questions. Okay, so I already introduced in the beginning of the episode the Hi-Tech Air Reactor, which works differently than air filters. Air filters are all about capturing molecules and what we call particulates. It's a non-descriptive word where lots of things are going to come back past this air filter, and it's going to grab it and make sure that when it pushes the air through, that it's no longer in the air. Hi-Tech Air Reactor, its goal is not to grab stuff and keep it from being in the air. What it does is it actually produces something called hydroxyls, which Edward is going to dig deeper into in 2 weeks from now. He's going to explain what hydroxyls are and why they work the way they do and how they're scientifically founded. If you guys even look up, there's a Wikipedia page for it. It's not science fiction. Although the Wikipedia page doesn't necessarily talk about everything, we're going to be talking about how we can use it, but to help heal us from mold. But all that being said, it's a real thing. It creates hydroxyls and it pushes it out into the environment. And when hydroxyls literally land and touch other molecules in the air, if it is toxic in the way that toxins work, it's kind of unstable molecularly, it's going to cause that molecule to fall apart. And this has to do with a variety of things that honestly I'm going to let Edward get into. But that's like the general basics if you're trying to envision how this machine works. Well, how did I learn about Hi-Tech air tech reaction? Because this is like, it's not one of these hot words. Like when we're talking about air filters, you have your basic HEPA. People know HEPA. You can have a HEPA filter on a vacuum. You can have a HEPA filter in an air filter. And then you have like the big name brands, AirDoctor and Molecule, that if you've been in the health sphere for a while, people really like to talk up. And there's a good reason for those 2 examples to be better than your average HEPA air filter. But at the end of the day, they're actually not good enough for mold. And I talked about why. So I learned about Hi-Tech about a year ago when I was inside of my friend Matt Kelly's Facebook group called Toxic Mold Answers. I do have it linked in the show notes. And I saw people talking about it. I'm like, what the heck is this Hi-Tech thing? It's not a brand name I'm familiar with. It's not like AirDoctor or Molecule. And I basically looked it up, and it was this it just to me seemed like this really random company producing this fairly expensive equipment that then people were saying was helping their mold sensitivity, and I was just a little suspicious. So I basically left it alone. I was like, I'm glad it's helping them. This is great. But also a year ago, I was taking a course on mold. I was learning about other air filters. I was trying to, again, being someone who wants to make good decisions for my clients, and I'll do research, but I don't cherish the experience of having to save all the documents and make visual clips and highlight stuff the way that a researcher really would do to prove to you what my process was for getting there. I didn't want to do any of that process on Hi-Tech a year ago because I was doing it with other things. And I just was underwhelmed with what I was finding with the other air filters. Well, fast forward to about 3 months ago, my family and we had moved to Kalamazoo to be closer to family, and we were getting ready to move into an apartment, and we were testing apartments with ERMIs and seeing what type of mold levels they had. And I knew that even if we found an apartment with low mold levels, I still wanted a way to protect myself and help break down mycotoxins that any of our stuff we were bringing into the home might have, or if that apartment had low levels, to even break it down even further. I just wanted the cleanest air possible. And I remember there's this thing called Hi-Tech. So suddenly I'm now very motivated to research it. I have got the time. I'm ready to spend the money if it's going to work. So about 3 months ago, I dig down, and as my non-researcher self, what I do is I say, okay, I'm not going to understand all the chemistry and physics that some scholarly article's going to throw at me. it's just going to be frustrating. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find as much positive proof as I can find. And I'm thinking, people talking about symptoms in the mold community, if you guys have been in it for a hot sec, you may be one of these people, or you've seen people like who sound like this post in Facebook groups or on Instagram. We are not easily impressed, right? We're sick. Lots of things haven't worked. And so I do take that positive remarks from people saying this actually worked is not a simple thing you get in the mold sick community. So that means a lot. But I also was really interested, could I find anybody who did any testing on their body, like an organic acids test before and after buying the Hi-Tech Air Reactor? Or could I find a person who had an ERMI before and after buying the Air Reactor, and it had nothing to do with remediation, who basically did an ERMI with no remediation, and the only variable that changed was buying and letting the Hi-Tech Air Reactor run. I was just looking for any positive proof I could find that seemed good enough while also not being a scholarly article. Because the other interesting thing that I've learned over being in this field for about 10 years, if you include the years where I've been sick, I got sick in 2015, I learned very quickly that research doesn't always actually belie the truth of a situation. And there's a lot that gets into this. There has to do with pathogens that I've researched that say this pathogen is commensal, meaning doesn't harm someone. And I have tons of clients who are getting actively negatively harmed by those pathogens. And so there's reasons that research kind of ends up the way it is. So I also have a lot of hesitations about research being the end all be all of truth, even though that's what we're aiming to do when we're doing the scientific method with research. So I started with just positive proof, a lot of people's individual stories, and any testing that they could show with buying that unit. And then I tried to find the most negative things I could say. And not just like people saying, I bought it and it didn't fix my entire health or life, because that would be overestimating. I'm not saying this unit is going to, buying the Hi-Tech Air Reactor will keep you from needing to remediate, or it means that it should solve every single mold symptom you're having, or it'll clean your body from inside out and you never have to buy any supplements or change your diet or do anything. I am not saying that, but I am saying it's a very powerful and potent component to healing that can speed up the healing process, especially before you even can get to remediation or leaving your moldy environment. That's powerful, right? If you're looking for just relief from symptoms, as well as protection in perpetuity, highly valuable if this can do what it says it can do. So I was looking for negative comments related to educated people, so somebody who has PhDs, master's degrees, who is the researcher, who could just like talk super mean about it. I wanted to find the meanest things I could find. So that's what I looked for. The positive proof that I found it very fast inside of my friend Matt Kelly's toxic mold group. I also did do Google searches for Hi-Tech and found some positive proof in just like random websites. It really was super random, but Hi-Tech Air Reactor, Hi-Tech Air Solutions, if you literally go into, and I've linked my friend Matt Kelly's group inside of the show notes. If you go to that group, join the group, you can actually use a search function that Facebook provides to search an entire group for terms you're interested in. So I just searched Hi-Tech and saw what came up. And I even did it today. There's even more positive testimonials that people have shared. People with MCAS, people who had OCD, people who have, like hives all across their body. There was all sorts of symptoms that people were having that they say they bought the Hi-Tech Air Reactor, and within a time frame usually of like hours to weeks, there was very notable and sustained symptom improvement. There's also, and I couldn't find it in the group just when I did a quick search today. It doesn't mean it's not there, but there was somewhere I found either on a Google search or inside of that group where someone literally had an ERMI, which is this dust test where you're testing your home's dust and seeing how much mold spores are in it. They'd had a before and an after test of an ERMI. And the only difference between the two tests was having bought the Hi-Tech Air Air Reactor. There was no remediation done officially, even though that's still recommended and warranted for full symptom relief. But they decided to spend the money and just do their own test, and they shared it. And it was amazing how much improvement there was in the ERMI. I didn't find anybody with an OAT test, which is testing your own body organic acids through urine to see what type of toxins are in there. And it's not going to be the best test for a before and after anyways for the Hi-Tech Air Reactor, because the body itself can become colonized and moldy. So sometimes an oat might sustain the same levels of toxicity, even if your environment is being cleaned up, if you are not doing things to actively get the toxins and the colonization out of your body. That is a topic for another podcast episode. It's what I actually teach my clients how to heal inside of my program, the Better Belly Blueprint, which you can learn about by going to betterbellytherapies.com/blueprint or click the link in the show notes. But all that being said, the Hi-Tech Air Reactor had tons of positive proof, and it was immediate and obvious. And again, people who are super sick in the mold world are not easily impressed. And so I was impressed. Then I said, what's the most negative thing I can find? One of the most negative things I found was a lawsuit created by someone named Carl Grimes, who is an expert and researcher on indoor air quality. And this lawsuit was a little hard to follow on the exact what was the issue was being caused. But basically, the Hi-Tech Air Solutions LLC claimed defamation by Carl Grimes, who was telling people that the Hi-Tech Air Reactor didn't work the way it suggested it did. And what I could find, I was trying to find, what does he mean it doesn't work? Is it the hydroxyls are a lie? Is it that the machine doesn't make maybe hydroxyls are real, but the machine can't make it? Like, what is his beef with this air reactor? And the only thing that I could find, and I now know why it was hard to kind of find some details on it, but the only thing that I could find to answer my question was that he had told people, he's a consultant, and he consults people who are mold sick, as well as having other people who have other environmentally sustained illnesses, that this machine did not mean that could not keep them from needing to remediate. Essentially, if you bought the machine, you still had to remediate. Interestingly enough, Hi-Tech Air Solutions does not claim that their machine means that you don't have to remediate. It only means that it can break down mycotoxins. That was not what Carl Grimes was resisting him on. So I found the dirtiest thing that someone could find, and it's actually fairly easy. You can kind of look up, Hi-Tech Air Solutions lawsuit. And I bring this up because if you do research, it comes up fairly easily in Google. It's not like deep in Google. And I want you to know that I saw it, right? If you see this, it could be like, oh, it had a lawsuit. Well, interestingly enough, Hi-Tech Air Solutions they claimed defamation, and they won the case. They were able to get Carl Grimes to basically cease and desist from his remarks that he was making on the efficacy of Hi-Tech Air Solutions, not because it doesn't work, but because he was over negatively saying that something that they weren't even saying, right? So that was what I found. And again, it never even got into chemistry. It was very interesting. I was expecting, oh no, I'm about to hit a chemistry, physics, like spiral down, and they're going to start talking about how the machine doesn't actually work or the technology isn't real or whatever. And that was not the issue. The issue was the claims it was making about what it couldn't do. And it wasn't even making the claims that Carl Grimes was then basically advising his clients to not buy this machine. So at the end of the day, the lawsuit gets closed, and a lot of the documents related to that lawsuit are actually sealed by the judge. And that is something that a judge can do just if they determine to. It doesn't mean anything's like scary or bad. It's just for whatever reason, that judge decided that they wanted to see all the documents related to the lawsuit. So it's now won't basically only have articles that are reporting what was going on in the lawsuit. And those can sometimes have like differing, like say slightly different things. But yeah, that was the most negative thing I could find. And I just felt like it actually wasn't that bad. I was like, the technology clearly works. That was never the issue. It was how far could you go? Was the technology going to basically say you don't need to remediate? No, you still need to remediate. That is the basics of healing from mold, is you need to remediate, or you need to leave the home or the environment you're in if you're not going to remediate and go somewhere else where the mold levels are low. So I was like, all right, the next step is for me to actually buy the sucker. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to see how it affects me and my family, see what differences we note. I knew going in that it's very common that when you buy the unit that you can have a chunk of time after you turn it on that it makes your air smell funny. And I was looking into why that might be, and a lot of people were suggesting that online that it smells funny because of how the hydroxyls are changing the molecules in the air, and it can give this like weird burning smell. It's not like quite like a fire burning, but it's different, right? Interestingly enough, I've run this air filter now in different homes, like my parents' home and in-laws' homes when we visit them for the holidays, just to protect our air as much as possible for me and my daughter in particular, being that now I can get tinnitus pretty quickly from even hours exposure of a moldy enough air, and my daughter will get nosebleeds and potentially even throw up. Again, not a sickness related with no fever, etc., but just randomly throw up and get nosebleeds anytime she's in these moldy environments as well. So we bring them, and it can create a scent there. And I've had like family members mention like, there's this like weird quality to the air. It like kind of smells weird, or like kind of I taste it in the back of my mouth, and it's like, yep, that's the hydroxyls reacting to molecules in the environment, and it's changing stuff. And so there's a smell. There's something tangibly, qualitatively different. So bought it, put it in our own home. It was in a new apartment, so there was no before and after of symptoms for us in the new apartment. It was basically we got it and probably put it in the new apartment within 2 weeks of moving into the apartment, maybe a little bit longer. Just being in that apartment, our symptoms did improve. We were previously staying with a family member for a couple months, and me and my daughter's symptoms were through the roof. I had tinnitus was my main symptom, which I talk about in episode 225, which I've linked in the show notes, and how I got tinnitus for the very first time on January 1st of 2024 this year. So I'm almost at my year anniversary. My daughter was getting nosebleeds, like they were waterfalls coming out of her nose. She was throwing up for no reason, having to be sent home from daycare, then developing no fever, showing no signs of sickness, and then going back, 24 hours later. And it was happening once a week, which is very frequent and very disruptive for me and my husband, who work full time. And so it's concerning, right? Like, why is my child throwing up all the time? So that was what happened. And just being in the apartment, my tinnitus was coming down, her nosebleeds were reducing, throwing up had stopped. But after Hi-Tech, right? So our apartment smelled funny for about 3, maybe 4 days. Sometimes it lasts longer for people, sometimes it's shorter. And then what I can tell you that has improved is that my daughter didn't go to my family member's house that was causing her to get nosebleeds for, it was like a month or two. She was going to daycare, staying with us at home. We were really busy. We hadn't visited. And then she stayed overnight in October, because we moved to our apartment in like early September, and then, or like late August. And then October 19th is my husband and I's anniversary, and she stayed at that family member's house while my husband and I went and had like an anniversary weekend. And as soon as she came back from that, staying over at that family member's house, I believe it was 2 nights. So she was there for 3 days, 2 nights. She came back, and a couple days after it, she'd had a nosebleed. And we're like, she hasn't had a nosebleed in like 6 to 8 weeks, right? It was noticeably different. Like it was boom, right after visiting, had this nosebleed. Well, what we started to do is take the Hi-Tech Air Reactor to this family member's house when she visits, especially if it's like a longer visit, like all day or an overnight thing. We mainly put it in the room that she's in because it's a very large house. And this they would need 4 or 5 probably to even potentially cover the square footage of the home. But just having one, which is ours, we would take it to their house and put it in the room she was going to sleep in so it could clean the air. And then because she takes a nap. So when she's at least taking her 2 to 3 hour nap, she's sleeping in better air. And immediately when she would come home, her nosebleeds were less severe. Now she would always get them, but they were less severe, she would go from literally waking up in the middle of the night, usually close to 2 a.m., and like cupping her hands and like crying. We could hear on the monitor and she'd say, blood, nosebleed, I'm bleeding. And we come in and her hands are full of blood. It's just like a terrible, it's like a nightmare, right? Just so she's got these hands full of blood. And that would be what would happen after visiting this family member's house. And then after this, after now bringing the Hi-Tech Air Reactor into this person's home, we would then bring her back home and she'd wake up with like a little bit of blood around the rim of her nose and maybe smeared on her face, but it's not like all on her blanket and like soaking the sheets. That was kind of the situation we were at. So really noticeable difference in scale. Yeah. Is there still a mold issue in that house? 100%. Like, am I somewhat still worried about the long-term potential repercussions of her visiting infrequently, even with the Hi-Tech Air Reactor? Sure. Do I also feel better that I have this unit that I can just take with me to immediately reduce her symptomology in the short term? Yes, I do feel better about it. So that is a hands down for me. If you're just taking in subjective testimonials, that's another testimonial showing that this air reactor is different. It's doing something truly to improve stuff. And another great example is we have in-laws that we stayed. So my husband's family, we will stay with when we go and visit them in Cincinnati. And this past November, we visited them for around the time of voting, so November 5th, because we had a family member running for a political position, and we were there to support them. And I had never noticed this before. This was the first time we visited their house since we moved into our new apartment, and I've probably been in the lowest mold environment that I've been in 6 to 10 years, estimating. At least 6, though. So we get to the house, and I don't realize until we get back home, my daughter has a nosebleed, and I'm like, oh, wait, she has a nosebleed. That only happens when we've been in a moldy environment. Well, also, I then realized my stomach hurt the entire time I was at that house. And I was vaguely aware of it, like, yeah, my stomach hurt, but it wasn't, I just didn't think of it. It was like, whatever, my stomach hurts sometimes. But honestly, guys, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt on a day-to-day basis. And I realized it hurt every single day I was there, and as soon as we got back, it stopped hurting. So that was a symptom that I had. And after that November 5th trip, we said, hey, we're going to visit this same home for Thanksgiving. We are going to bring our Hi-Tech Air Reactor. And guess what? No stomach hurting the entire time. Daughter had minimal nosebleeds. Again, she did actually have one, both while she was there and when we got back, but much less than the nosebleed she had coming back after the November 5th trip. And we're going to bring it again when we go to Christmas to visit that family. So that is kind of like our before and after, where it's just a noticeable difference in specific environments that we've seen symptoms come up that have, to us, prove that there's mold. There's a mold issue in those environments. So real quick, the limitations of high-tech, and I've already started digging into this. I just don't want you guys to hear, like, I'm not saying this is the only thing you need to heal from mold. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you only need this device and you will not need remediation. I'm not saying that. Two really great examples are these family members' homes that we visit, that my daughter still gets nosebleeds when she, and I usually am not staying there long enough because I'm not staying there as long as her. I have gotten tinnitus when I've been in these environments long enough, but I'm not there very long. So she's my main, unfortunately, right? I wish it wasn't having to take data from her. but she is my data collection point. When she's staying there long enough that she's getting symptoms and it's nosebleeds, it shows that it is not the equipment is not stopping the nosebleeds. It's not completely demolishing it. Now, could she potentially get even more improvement if they had more high-tech air reactors in their home? Yes, because here's another limitation of the air filter is that it can only produce so many hydroxyls for its size. And there are two different sizes. There actually might be more, but I'm pretty sure there's only two. And I say that because I'm not a sales representative for Hi-Tech. They do have one, and we've actually partnered with one, Lynn and Edward Furtado, who are our guest speakers for the next two episodes, who are going to talk more about the science behind the equipment. They're also going to talk about their own personal story and how they got mold sick and went from basically being executives at Fortune 100 companies to being bedridden with lesions in their mouths and across their body and being almost nonverbal, having seizures, all sorts of stuff. You're going to hear more of Lynn's story, and then Edward, who is her husband, his perspective, both as a husband and as an engineer by trade, on this equipment. But go and talk to somebody to a sales rep to understand sizing better. But sizing has to do with the literal square footage of the home, but also how moldy the home is. Meaning, if you're familiar with the ERMI test, a good example would be you could have an ERMI score of 5, which is like good. It's like the most ideal situation is like -4. You want to be in the negatives. Then if you're like 0 to 5, you have a little bit of mold. And if you're 5 to 20, you have a lot more mold. And if you're 20 plus, that's usually when I'm like, tell my clients, if you're 20 plus, get out of that environment. It's just not redeemable in terms of trying to relieve your symptoms. You can come back to it after you remediate, but I've never seen a client be able to reduce symptoms if they're in a 20 plus environment. Well, they got the issue is if you're in, like, say, if you have a 15 moldiness level on your ERMI, one high-tech air filter isn't going to cover as much square footage because those hydroxyls are bumping into more mold spores and mycotoxins at a higher density, even if the space is still about the same size. So you do want to have your home sized by a representative. You can always start with one. Start with one unit and be able to just see the improvement. If you start with one unit, really great way to start typically is putting it somewhere where you're spending a lot of time. For most people, you're hands down always going to spend the most amount of time in your bedroom. Even if you have an office, kind of depends on how much you work, but we're hopefully sleeping 8 hours. If you are working more than you're in your office than you are sleeping, put it in your office, but put it wherever you're spending the most amount of time. And that's where you're going to get the biggest improvement if you can only buy one unit first, even if you need technically more based on the square footage of your home or the moldiness level. But a high-tech sales representative, they're literally designed and trained for how to give you advice on the equipment and not just sell you something that you don't need, but to get you reasonable results. And also to mitigate your expectations and even give you advice. They can read ERMIs, they can do all these things. At least I don't know if every single high-tech sales rep can read an ERMI and give you advice on that, but the ones we've partnered with, Lynn and Edward, they can. So Lynn has given me her contact info. She's the main contact for this couple, and we're going to be putting it in every single episode today, next week, and the week after. If you want to call her, email her, and connect with her, she's open to basically calls anytime. I know this is very unusual for a podcast to basically say, just call this person, but she has verbally said that. You'll hear her say it next week in her episode. You can call her anytime. You can set up an appointment. If you're like, my life's crazy, I would like to set up an appointment. Again, call or text or email, and you can set up that appointment and know that there's a time that you and she will talk. But that sales representative can help you size your home, answer all your questions, look at your ERMI if you have one. I've seen some of the conversations they've been having with my clients. They're extremely detailed. They're great listeners, and they're not just trying to sell you something. And even if you decide not to buy at the end of the day, There's like no hard feelings because they've been sick. They understand all the decisions that you're having to make as a mold sick person, and they're just trying to give you information. Again, you're going to hear that straight from Lynn's mouth in next week's episode, but that's kind of the limitations conversation I wanted to have on the Hi-Tech unit, that the size of the home and how moldy it is can impact the quality or just how much the symptoms can be improved. The next thing is going to be, if you listen to what I just said and they're like, moldiness level, Ermi, what are you talking about? Go check out episode 222, which is 5 Signs of Hidden Mold with Brian Carr, and episode 223, my 3-step mold treatment plan, where I literally share with you exactly what I do with my clients to help heal them from mold. And those episodes are going to allude to or talk more explicitly about the Ermi test and how to test your home, how to test your body for mold. If those are the questions you're having, I linked those episodes in the show notes with all of our episodes we've had from our first mold series we did earlier this year. So I think that's kind of it. That was the big introductory episode I really wanted to have on Hi-Tech Air Reactors. My big recommendation from here is that you listen to the next 2 weeks. If you want to learn more about Hi-Tech Air Reactors, listen to the next 2 weeks' episodes. If you're not a subscriber, subscribe to the podcast so you get notified that they're coming out. And then if you want to determine if Hi-Tech is right for you or be sized for your home, or learn what expectations to have, or just have another conversation with a human being about your mold illness and potential things you can do, then you can contact and reach out to Lynn with the information she's provided in our show notes, her phone number and her email. So those are some next steps. Again, listen to the next 2 weeks' episodes and contact Lynn and get some information. Tell her you found her from the Better Belly podcast. I'm sure it's going to cheer her heart. Again, if you don't talk to her right now or this week, you can always listen to her episode coming up next, or her husband's episode in 2 weeks, or both. So that is it. I hope that this was helpful to you guys and just starting to expose you to a piece of equipment that it's not sexy. It's not in the market right now. Like, everyone talks about AirDoctor. Everyone talks about Molecule. It's actually more expensive than those, and it can look like very confusing if you're not familiar with the technology, which is pretty much all of us, right? PCO technology, hydroxyls, what the heck are these? Hang in, stay tuned, come learn more from Edward and Lynn in the next 2 weeks, and I will catch you guys then. Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening. You can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of. And you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.